All right, here we are. I'm down here with Jon Buzby in the basement studio doing this in person, which I don't always get a chance to do. So I'm excited that we're able to do this. Today I'm sitting down with Jon Buzby. He doesn't know this. I call him Johnny B. I don't think you've known that. I've called you Johnny B for probably a year now. A good friend of mine lives in the neighborhood. It's close by. And I was excited about this one initially, and John and I talked about this for a second before we hit record, because the habit of service work, right? We're both in the nonprofit world. Mm-hmm. You much longer than I, and I have a lot of respect for what you've done in your career. And when I found out that you were coming towards the end of it, 35 years with the Special Olympics, my initial thought is I got to get him on here and talk about it. So thanks for coming here and doing it.
My pleasure. It's going to be fun.
John, you're a lot of things. You're a man of mystery. I thought I knew you. Then I did some more research into you. Like I've already said, 35 years of the Special Olympics. You're the author of 2 books.
3, actually.
3? All right. Clearly haven't done my research. Coaching Kids Made Easier. Not an expert. Just a dad in this crazy thing called life. And what's the third?
Third is Coaching Kids. It's more than X's and O's. So it's a lot of... both of the coaching books were from my experience as a youth coach and as a phys ed teacher, and how people get so wrapped up in wins and losses, and coaches get driven out of coaching because of parents, and officials get driven out of games because of coaches, and just trying to figure out the world of youth sports back then. I coached my oldest son, my 32-year-old. I coached him in just about everything. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that was good or bad. I'm not sure whether he would tell you that was good or bad. My father was not that way, not a sports fan at all, never coached me in anything. I think he came to the games because he had to type of thing. Yeah. And that's just, and as I tell people, you know what? I probably turned out to be the athlete I was, whatever that was, either because he wasn't involved, or if he had been involved, maybe I would have quit. You just don't know if he had been one of those dads you hear about all the time. Yeah, so sports to you is a massive thing. I mean, and it's not just a sport or even 3 or 4. You're just a fan of sports in general. Yeah, it's funny when I was growing up and got the Phillies shirt on here. My team was the Phillies, and this is back in the day when they weren't on the TV all the time. Yeah. So I'd fall asleep listening to them on the radio, or at least my mother thought I was falling asleep. Yeah, right, I really wasn't, but it was on the radio. And I will never forget. I had a chance to go to a lot of big games and big places. I'll never forget. My greatest memory as a sports fan is the first time I walked up to Veterans Stadium and walked into it and saw the artificial turf field. Really? And to me, it was like when Dorothy got to Oz. Really? I mean, it was just, and I don't even remember how old I was. I remember I was with my Uncle George. Again, my father, not a big sports fan, so my first trip to a major league baseball game or any sport was with my father. And I'll just never forget when people who used to go to Veterans Stadium, and now it's that way with any stadium, you walk in, you walk across the aisleway or where the fans go back and forth, and then you see the field. And I'll just never forget. To me, it was like I found what heaven was. Wow. Going up there. Yeah, because I'll even mention sports to you and say, hey, we're watching F1, and I've actually talked to other even friends of yours about this. You'll start watching a sport because a friend of yours is watching a sport. I was going to say, so the two sports that I never knew anything about, never thought I would want to know anything about, was the F1 racing, mm-hmm. and the Premier Soccer League. And I was a soccer player. I grew up playing soccer, played in high school, and so I'm a soccer fan. My son plays soccer, and but I started following the Premier League because my oldest son started following it, mm-hmm. and so all of a sudden I have an interest in that. And my brother actually just became a part-time owner in the league that's below the Premier League of the Swansea City team. And so it's a team, I don't know how much you know about the Premier League, but in the Premier League, they play a regular season. There's no playoffs. The bottom 3 teams in the league get relegated to the league below them, like almost to the minor leagues. Now, that minor league is better than most professional soccer leagues in the world. Sure. But anyway, I digress. So I became interested in the Premier League. And again, part of it was so I could follow it with my son, but I got hooked on it. And then I didn't start watching F1 until I found out you and your wife and your whole family follow F1. Yeah. And you guys are not huge sports fans. No. But to me, it's like, okay, if this family that is not a huge sports family, you're not from overseas where it's the biggest, is interested in this, there's got to be something to it. And one of my broadcast partners, Bill Harmon, who is a big sports guy and everything, he's intrigued by it. That's the word he uses. He says, I watch it because I'm intrigued by it. Yeah. And I thought, well, if Josh is watching it and Bill Harmon is watching it, I must be missing something. And then I see him change all 4 tires in 2.3 seconds. And I figured out what intrigues everybody about the sport.
Yeah. So now you grew up as an athlete.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, you've coached your oldest son. Your middle son Riley is an extremely talented athlete himself. Tyler's also an athlete. He plays sports.
Yep.
You talk about being a father and being a coach, and not what I've got from it is not pushing these kids to still enjoy the sport. Mm-hmm. And you're not a guy who gets wound up about very much. I've never seen you kind of raise your voice in anger at anything.
I behave when you're over on the deck.
That's all it is. Is that kind of an intuitive thing for you, where you saw sports in a certain way, where you knew, man, these parents are just driving the fun out of this?
It's funny because when I've coached, I get very enthusiastic on the sideline as a coach, but it's about the game and it's about what's going on in the game.
Sure.
It's not about what happens after the game. I've never been one of those coaches who were running laps after the game before because of that kind of thing. And so I've always tried to separate that. I'm a driven person. And so when I coach, I want to see my kids that I'm coaching be the best they can be. And when they're not being the best they can be because they're making mental mistakes, again, physical mistakes happen.
Sure.
And that's one of the things I've talked about in the book. No kid misses a free throw on purpose, but you're going to miss them. And yelling at them doesn't change that. Yeah. If anything, it makes them think about it more. It makes it worse. So, I tried to. I've always tried to separate that, what goes on in a game, and I was the same way as a player. I was a very aggressive player, emotionally, more than physically. And so I was the guy yelling at my teammates if they weren't doing things right and that kind of thing. But that was the leader in me, or at least that's what I always told myself. And I've had these conversations with Riley, who you mentioned, because he's in the same position. He's a captain in 3 sports, and there's certain things captains have to do and certain things they shouldn't do and that kind of things. And we've had a lot of conversations like that. But I think when parents drive kids, and I'm seeing it right now. I do a podcast for high school football, and so we follow it. And the big thing here in Delaware is transfer rules and these kids transferring. And I talked to a dad the other day, his kid's in his 3rd school playing quarterback in 3 years. And I feel bad for the kid.
Of course.
Because I think if the kid had his way, he'd be playing at the first school he went to. And if he becomes a star, he becomes a star. And if he doesn't, he doesn't. And, kids don't care about sports nearly as much as we parents think they do. And sometimes when they do, it's because they're doing it for the parents. Kids want to be kids, they want to have fun, and they want to have friends. And you can't tell me a kid that's playing his 3rd year into 3 different schools because of the quarterback situation at all 3 schools is going to have fun. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, on here we talk a lot about building a connection through a shared purpose and challenge, and that's what sports offers, right? Yeah. So when you don't have the opportunity to make those connections because you're constantly just moving around at that pivotal age, right? Like that's the time. I mean, to make these connections. Yeah, that's a sad thing.
Yeah, it is. And I was a high school coach back in college. I coached in college. I coached a little bit when I got out, but I never coached my own kids in high school, and I never really wanted to. And I think some people love that and they live for that. And you hear a lot of great stories about parents who coach their kids in high school. But one of my articles I wrote one time was, high school is when if you're not the coach, that's when you step back. And I've now watched my oldest son, my 32-year-old, he played sports. Riley he's going into his senior year, so he's played 3 different teams, 9 different seasons total at the varsity level. And I've not once questioned the coach. I've not once talked to Riley about, what happened, why something didn't happen during a game. I might ask why it did happen, but I never questioned why the coach didn't do something a different way or not, because to me, that's the coach's job. If my child's health or safety is at risk,
that's different.
That's a different story.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's the high school coach's job. we allow our kids to play sports for coaches because we trust them, and we should. And not every coach is perfect, and there's situations where parents do need to step in. But by and large, it's, I became the dad in the bleachers who's very quiet during the high school games. I talk to my wife quietly. She gets irritated and moves away from me.
I tell you, it's because I didn't grow up playing team sports, and I find it hard to not say something to the coach when you feel, and obviously we all look through these biased eyes when it's our own kids.
Sure.
And I've actually had my son say, like, "Hey, Dad," not that I'm yelling. I'm saying, "Hey, do you want me to say?" And he's like, "No, just let and he's right, which I hate admitting, but there is a animalistic kind of need that a parent feels to protect their kids.
That's
so,
what you're doing.
Yeah.
So one more quick story about what you're just talking about. My oldest son played for Newark Parks and Rec. This was before high school and the middle school. And he was on a team that was excellent. And this is a rec level. This isn't travel sports. It's not high school sports. And they would blow teams out, like literally be up by 40 points in a basketball game in the first half and continued to push the ball, full court press, et cetera, to the point where I called the park and recreation department directors who I knew. And I said, look, I'm not that dad whose team's getting blown out complaining. I'm on this other side and we're blowing this other team out. And there's 9 kids on the floor who aren't having fun. You know? And so anyway, it got out of hand again at one of the games, and I said something to the coach, and my son was furious.
Was he?
Furious at me, and I'll never forget. I told the story one time on a different show in an article, and I said, that's probably my biggest regret as a sports parent. Because it's the one time that I crossed the line, and I talked to a coach during the game, but I was so furious that my kid was part of a team that was beating the living daylights out of another team, and the coach was encouraging it. And I was just watching the other parents and the other coaches cringe, and it just drove me bonkers. And so, again, regret it, can't change it.
Yeah.
But that's right to your point of you get to a point sometimes where you feel you just have that instinct.
So, we started this off where I had mentioned, hey, you've done 35 years with the Special Olympics, and so there, to me, there's two different things going on there, and we're going to get into the podcast. You're a host of the Delaware Football Podcast.
Yep.
But that really, I left your house, and you had mentioned you were retiring, and I knew what you worked for. But the last time there was something about it, I left the house, and I think it was probably the next day that I reached out to you about coming on here, and it's the habit of being service to others.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you're talking about even the sports, you've actually, in my mind, combined two different things, right? You've got this service side of helping, and I want to use the right terminology because I know it's changed, but kind of special needs.
Yeah, people with intellectual disabilities.
Okay, intellectual disabilities.
Okay. Special needs, that's the common term. There's official terms and common terms. And terms you don't use.
Sure.
That type of thing.
And so you've mixed working with that and with sports. What drove you? What was that deciding factor? Was that something you'd always wanted to do? Or is it something you kind of just found yourself doing and then was like, I love it so much, I'm going to make this a career? How did that work out?
Well, it really was happen chance. I was a graduate student at the University of Delaware in my first year, and I was had a teaching assistantship, which means you're on the faculty going to school to get your graduate degree. In my first year, it's a 2-year commitment. And one of the athletic trainer at the University of Delaware was on the board of directors for Special Olympics. And he asked me if I would be interested in filling their director of sports position part-time until they found somebody to do it full-time.
They're still looking.
They're still looking. And so, we laughed because my boss, who's now retired also, when I met with her, I stood up after she, I guess, was more of a formal interview. I didn't look at it that way. I had never been on an interview before. And I just went in and we chatted, and I stood up, and after it was over, I said, all right, when do you want me back? And she said, and so she laughed about that. It wasn't anything official. And so anyway, long story short, I ran a couple events, did a few things. The year ended, my first year of graduate school, and I was able to work with the university to make it so that I could get out of my contract as a teaching assistant and take this full-time job. Yeah. And so it started that way, and 35 years later, I'm still there. I did take 7 years where I went and taught school because that's what I went to school for, elementary phys ed. I wanted to prove that I could do that, I guess, lack of a better term. But I was still working part-time with Special Olympics at the time. They created a position for me to do that. And so that's how I got started. I tell people I sat down with the athletic director at the University of Delaware to talk about my career, what I wanted to do, that kind of thing. And he asked me, he said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to make a difference in a sports organization. At the time in my head, I was thinking high school.
You weren't thinking
college. Was not thinking Special Olympics. This was before this whole Special Olympics thing started. And then I look back at 35 years, and I feel like I made a difference in a sports organization, let alone the people that I worked for.
Yeah, so. I mean, honestly, so we talk about jobs where you go in and you get paid for the job, and you're working for a nonprofit, you're never going to be monetarily rich, right?
No.
Right. But at the same time, the amount of lives, I don't know, I can't imagine this is something you think about on a regular because it's your everyday, but the amount of lives that you've had a positive impact, both within the kids and then the parents, it's unimaginable. I mean, 35 years of that's a long time.
Yeah, when I think about, some of the people getting ready, there was a guy who was in his first year of Special Olympics who opened our summer games 2 years ago because he was celebrating his 50th Special Olympics event.
Wow.
And, it's that type of thing. I knew him when he was young. And, there's all kinds of stories that I have about, seeing people grow older as I grow older. And then, the toughest thing for me in the last 5 years has been watching the athletes who were there when I first started start passing away.
Oh, yeah, I can
and that is a tough thing to accept. I mean, it is what it is,
sure.
But you grow, and it's not like, people always say, oh, you must love being around the athletes all the time. I'm not around the athletes all the time. I'm around the athletes when we're at our events, and then the other 90% of my job is in the office and out meeting with people. And so it's just it's thinking about, so I go to summer camp 2 weeks ago, and the first thing 2 of the campers who are now 35, 40 years old asked me about is, how is my oldest son doing? Because when my oldest son was 8, 9, or 10 years old, I would take him to camp, and he would be in the cabin with me with these guys who were boys back then. They were 8, 9, 10, just like him. They were peers. And they still remember that. They remember his name. They remember what went on. And remember
Crazy.
that, And then I text my son, and he says, "Oh man, that was great. I'm glad, Dad. I'm glad you took me down to camp and let me experience that." And so,
it's beautiful.
It's stuff like that.
Yeah, it's obviously been kind of tattooed on in their mind that it's stuck out enough that that's big, right?
Yep. Yeah.
What part? Even on the sports side, you got to see the same love of the sport. I mean, you're talking about walking out of the field and this love that you feel. You must see that in these athletes exactly the same as every. I feel like at some point I'm gonna step on a landmine with my terminology. I want to make sure that it's, but. What point within working with the Special Olympics did you say, like, wait a minute, I'm not coaching high school, I'm not coaching college, but I'm where I'm supposed to be?
It's funny because when I stepped into Special Olympics, this was back in 1991 or 1990, I guess it was, they made a shift nationally and internationally to start following the rules, believe it or not. So for the first 20 years that the organization existed, they didn't follow rules. And the thinking was, well, they have a disability. They can't follow the rules. And so this is the example when I talk to groups. This is the example I use. So in a pool, if you're running a 50-meter sprint, but it's the butterfly, and you have 3 people doing the butterfly and 3 people doing the freestyle, the 3 people who are doing the freestyle are going to win no matter what, because they're cheating, basically. Right. And so what was happening is you'd put these 6 people in the pool, and the 3 freestyles would win the butterfly event, gold, silver, bronze, and the 3 swimmers that actually were doing the event properly got nothing. Well, they got ribbons. Everybody gets something. They got ribbons. And so when I came on board, the first task my boss gave me, and it was because I was a sports person, she said, "Oh, this is perfect." She said, "Because we need somebody who doesn't come here with the Special Olympics background, because we want you to turn this into a sports organization. And so my first go-do was, we're starting to follow the rules.
How did that go over?
It did not go over well with most people.
Imagine not.
I still remember the mom when I disqualified her butterfly athlete for swimming the freestyle, and she was not happy.
Oh, yeah.
And it was her coach that agreed with me originally when I said, hey, this is what we're going to try. She said, oh, that'll be great. We got to do this, because she was a swimmer. This lady who helped me run the event was a swimmer. So anyway, I had the pleasure, and I don't talk about this a whole lot because most people don't care, because I've been around so long. Most people who come into Special Olympics just assume we follow the rules, because we do.
Right.
But it was a huge thing, and we worked regionally. I worked with people from Pennsylvania and Maryland, because they were the same thing. There kind of was a trend in hiring people for Special Olympics at every level. We don't need special education people. We need sports people. And if we're going to turn this into a true sports organization, we need sports people, not the special education teachers who think everybody should get a gold medal no matter what they do, that kind of thing. And so from a sports standpoint, that's really was my biggest challenge. And I figured if I can survive that with as big of a change as that was, I can survive anything down the road. And, we've had issues that come up and everything like that. But that was probably my biggest challenge professionally, because I not only, it's easy just to change the rules, but to get the people on board with it was the big challenge.
Especially when her son won gold medal for the past 5 years, and then
he's never lost, undefeated. But that lady was a great lady, and she became our biggest proponent.
Really?
When I sat down with her and her husband, or the husband was on the board of directors, and I said, look, this is why we're doing this. I said, put yourself in that position. If it was your daughter who was swimming the stroke correctly and got beat by somebody who wasn't, it's like doing a 50-meter walk. If you're going to let the guy that runs full speed win it, why are you running a 50-meter walk? And so, 100 examples, but that was a big challenge for me.
Even the fact that her husband's on the board of directors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just to go through that as a brand new person implementing rules.
Yep. And I'll tell you, we lost some coaches.
Yeah.
We did lose some coaches. And I said to my boss, I said, I'm sorry. She said, no, you don't need to be sorry. She said, we know when you make changes, 10% of the people are not going to follow you. Mm. It's the other 90%. 10% aren't going to follow you. You need 10% who are all gung-ho about it. And then you got to make sure that 80% comes up with that gung-ho piece of it. And that's kind of how I approached it. I knew after 2 months, these are the 5 coaches who are leaving, and we're never going to see them again. And they did, and we haven't. And that's fine, because they didn't want to be part of that. But that's what the organization strove to do, to become a sports organization.
In the world of habits, you mentioned earlier that, when kids, and this isn't just going to be kids, because adults are going to relate to this also, but when they have a mental lapse, right, in the moment, we'll just use the sports arena for the conversation. What types of talks do you have with kids as a coach, as a father talking to his son? Because those are the hardest ones, because they stick with you, right? Mm-hmm. And those are the ones that you feel that anxiety the next time this thing comes around. So what types of conversations do you have in that situation?
We have the same conversations I would have with any coach, any athlete that I coached. And one of my favorite coaches, and we have a lot of adults. Our program's half kids and half adults. Mm-hmm. And of those half adults, I would say 30% of them are 40 years and older. And so they stick with the program. There's no upper age limit for it. But it's the same conversations, and this is what we tell people when we go through coaches' education with them. Whether you're talking to a person, child or adult, in an athletic setting over something that happened in the sports world, or you're coaching them on the field, you're coaching them in practice. We tell our Special Olympics coaches, do it the way you would do it for anybody first and see if that works. And if it works, then you've got your answer. But if it doesn't, you're going to have somebody with autism who's not going to react to certain things, who's going to have tendencies, and you have to learn that, and you have to figure everybody's got quirks. And I always tell audiences that, it's not special needs people. It's all of us. Yeah, We've all got quirks. And so, I've got more stories, and this is a God's honest truth. I've got more stories about kids without disabilities who I've coached, who I had to figure out. I had a kid when he was 5 in a T-ball field. He was petrified to go out onto the mound or off to another position. He loved batting. He loved running. He did not want to go out there. And so I had to figure out how to get him out there. And I started by doing it at practice, and I started by doing it in non-stressful situations. And, you try to figure that out. And I would have done the same thing if he had Down syndrome.
Sure.
The same type of thing. And so, again, back to habits, the habit of being a good coach is not having the attitude of this is the way we're going to do it and it's the only way that works. Because when you have a baseball team with 12 players, you've got 12 different ability levels, you've got 12 different personalities, you got 12 different parents' personalities that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And so you've got to coach different ways. And that's in my one book, Coaching Kids, It's More Than X's and O's. That's what that book is about. It's about what coaches face that have nothing to do with how you swing a baseball bat or how you shoot a basket. It's everything else that goes on in coaches and how you can prepare to prevent some things from happening. There's nothing more irritating when the coach tells you, or when you tell the parents, pick your kid up at 8:00 and practice ends at 8:20. There's nothing more irritating. You know that as a parent who's picked your kids up 100 times. And, so that's one thing. You want to stay on the parent's good side? End practice when you say you're going to end practice. Those types of things. And if you get in those habits of being consistent and being consistent with every kid and every parent and those type of things, and then, it just makes your life that much easier. And it's been no different with the things that I've done with Special Olympics. When we run coaching clinics, we run coaching clinics as if you're going to coach a kid who doesn't have a disability. And then we have a portion of the clinic where we talk about different situations. And we do that by bringing in the coaches that actually do the coaching.
Yeah.
We bring in our best coaches.
Well, anyone locally might even recognize your voice from reading the ad for our speaker series event last year. We've got that coming up again this year. It was my own procrastination is the reason you didn't have to read that again this year. but
I'd be happy to do it again.
I appreciate that.
Because I enjoy that.
Yeah.
I enjoy doing that.
You got the voice for it. So thank you. Obviously, I've got no ties to the Special Olympics community, but just on that service side behalf, man, thanks for 35 years of doing what you do, and I look forward to what you got going on in retirement.
Thank you. The one thing I regret, and this is something maybe a message for people who are trying to develop habits and stuff, because I worked for a nonprofit, it kept me from volunteering for other nonprofits. So in other words, my professional life is supporting a nonprofit, and then I was so busy in the rest of part of my life with a lot of the things you talked about, as well as doing things for my kids, coaching my kids and that kind of stuff. I never latched on to another nonprofit. And that's going to be one of my first goals when I retire. I haven't figured out what it's going to be.
Sure.
And I've told the Special Olympics people, look, I'll always come back and volunteer. I'll always be here. I told them when I announced my retirement a year ago, I want you to pretend I'm moving to Florida. So I want you to plan as if I'm not going to be anywhere near here. Yeah. But I will be, and I will come back, and we've already, discussed some things that I'm going to do. But one of my biggest goals is to latch on. And the thing that I don't want to do is I don't want to latch on so much to one other nonprofit that it keeps me from helping other nonprofits. Yep, and sense. So, I can see going to the SPCA and walking dogs once a week, but not every day.
Right.
Because on another day I might go volunteer for the food bank. And so back to your thing with the habits is, and I'm a habit person. And, you talk about seeing me on my bike. My wife will tell you, I get up, I feed the dogs, I head to the chair, I do the crossword puzzle while I've got the news on that I'm half paying attention to. Sure. And then when I can't do that in the morning, and that happens a lot when you're an event manager and you do that, you're leaving the house at 6, you're not sitting down to do the crossword. It drives me crazy. and if I don't have lunch right around 12, drives me crazy. And so my habits, and maybe you'll have me on the show next year at this time, and we can talk about all my habits, or maybe I have my wife on and she could tell you how much I drive her crazy. But, the habits of the day-to-day things that I do. And so, I've already thinking through, I'm still going to do the crossword, but then I'm going to go out on my bike. Yeah. Because then I can get that done with. And it's something I love to do, but I don't always get to do it if 7 o'clock rolls around and I'm not out there yet. And so it's that type of thing that I want to create new habits when I retire. And one of those habits is going to be I want to support a few, maybe eventually several, nonprofits doing simple things
Sure.
that need to be done.
Nothing
is beneath me. And that's what I tell people. There's nothing that I'm not willing to do. And I want to try to figure that out and create a new habit that is giving back to a nonprofit organizations that I feel I have not done because of my commitment to my job.
Of course.
And then everything else that
I mean, it'd be like, a framer volunteering as a hobby. I'm going to go frame houses. It's
right.
like, hey, it makes complete sense. But there is something about that service work, and I've talked about it on here before that, in a way, it's almost a selfish thing, right? Because the way that the things that come back to you from doing that, they're very hard to replicate, right? That is, there's something special behind doing that. So people say, you're not me. It's going, hey, you're doing such great work, and until you do it, and then you realize, holy crap, man, this feels fantastic. Like, right. So it makes a lot of sense. But John, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. This was a lot of fun, man.
It was.
And I look forward to doing it again sometime.
Sounds good.
Let's do it.